Good afternoon. It's wonderful to see a full house this afternoon, but of course not at all surprising given that today's guest almost needs no introduction. Arianna Huffington has been an influential voice on the world stage for more than 3 decades. Time magazine has put her on its most influential people list twice, and she's a fixture on the Forbes list of most powerful women. In 2005, she launched the Huffington Post, which quickly became one of the most widely read and frequently cited media brands on the internet. She's a prolific writer, author, speaker, and she addresses subjects as diverse as Maria Callas, Pablo Picasso, Greek mythology, current events, politics, and sleep. Her best-selling books Thrive and The Sleep Revolution launched her into the forefront of this nation's discussion about the importance of sleep and wellness. Now, no doubt she'll feel right at home here at Stanford because Stanford is the birthplace of sleep medicine, with the Sleep Medicine Center having pioneered so many discoveries, therapies, and treatments, such as the 1999 groundbreaking discovery of the cause of narcolepsy. In 2016, Arianna left the Huffington Post to start a startup, Thrive Global, with the mission of changing the way we work and live, getting away from the collective delusion that burnout is a necessary consequence of success. As she has described, we Americans suffer from time famine that adversely affects every aspect of our culture. We see the results in our homes, our schools, workplaces, hospitals, government buildings, and even professional sports. But Arianna doesn't stop there. She offers a compelling alternative to the delusion that we must drive ourselves to exhaustion, what she describes as a third metric to measuring success: wellness, wisdom, wonder, and giving. I'm excited to talk with her today about that and about our relationship to technology as it becomes smarter, but also as it becomes smarter as it becomes more intrusive. So please join me in welcoming Arianna Huffington to Stanford Medicine and to the stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Please. Well, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting me, for the great introduction, and thank you all for being here.
Lots and lots going on. In your recent books, you've talked a lot about technology, about the way the smartphone has changed the way we live and work, and the way also it's changed the way we interact with technology and sort of the role that technology now all too often plays in controlling our lives rather than enabling our lives. Have we just not got the right balance, or has there been some fundamental shift in the way technology impacts and influences our lives, and what do we need to do about it?
I think we're actually at this amazing inflection point when we are finally realizing that technology is a tool, and how we use it and the boundaries we set around it are going to determine the lives we lead. We spent, a couple of decades completely in thrall of every new technological advance as though it would usher in the golden age. And 2017 was the year when we woke up and realized that there are unintended consequences, and that we need to establish the new rules of the road, the new rules of engagement. And we were talking earlier about our fascination with big data, but we tend to ignore data when it contradicts our views. And right now we have an enormous amount of data that shows that our growing addiction to our devices, our growing addiction to social media is having a really terrible effect, especially on teenagers and children. We were together at a Fortune Brainstorm Healthcare Conference this week, and Bernard Tyson, the CEO of Kaiser Permanente, had some stunning and alarming new statistics about suicide being the #1 cause of death among teenagers 15 to 19 years old, skyrocketing numbers of depression and anxiety, and a clear correlation with how much time you spend on social media. So we now have a lot of data to show not that technology isn't wonderful and it doesn't affect everything we're doing, but that we need to set certain boundaries. And one of the things we did at Thrive, we launched an app. Yes, believe it or not, there is an app to control apps. And we call it the Thrive app. It's available on Android until June, and then it will also be available on iOS. It's free because the essence of Thrive Global, my new company, is changing the culture. And basically, it helps you put your phone in Thrive mode if you're doing something where you don't want to be distracted. You're having a meal with your friends or family, and you don't want anyone to be able to distract you, except, you can always have an exclusion if somebody has to be able to reach you at all times. And not only that, but it's bi-directional. So if the dean texts me and I'm in Thrive mode, he will get a text back that says, Arianna is in Thrive mode until such and such a time. So it also creates kind of a new value. Instead of now only valuing people who are always on, we begin to value people who know how to prioritize what's important in their lives. And it also gives you a mirror of your social media consumption. So it will tell you, Dean Minor, you spent 2.5 hours on Candy Crush today. Would you like to reduce it? And if you said, yes, I want to reduce to 2 hours, it would give you notifications, and at 2 hours, it would cut you out. So the point here is that, like any kind of addiction, we need help. Mm-hmm. And we can use technology to help us deal with this growing addiction to technology and this reconnection to ourselves, our essence, and that center that we all have in us. I'm glad Dean Shaw is here so she can testify to that center. And even if you don't have any spiritual beliefs, every major philosophy, whether it's Stoics or the Tao, comes to the same conclusion that there is a center in each human being of peace, wisdom, strength, love, and anything we can do to tap into it more and more often enriches the life that we live dramatically.
Does this change that you just spoke about and that you've written about, in other words, the way technology has become to dominate our lives, control our lives, is this a reflection of the addictive power of technology? Does it reflect a more fundamental shift in society and culture today that technology has fueled, but is, once we peel back the layer of technology, is the solution just from peeling back the layer of technology, or is there something more fundamental going on about human interaction and human values that the transformation has been enabled by technology, but in fact, the changes actually say something much deeper about the human condition? What's your view about technology as an enabler to get to the bad results with another cause, or being the actual cause?
I think two things. One is that there is something happening with the attention economy that is very specific to what algorithms and machine learning can do, which is feed us the kind of content that is more likely to make us want to keep clicking, because after all, a lot of these companies are basing their revenues on just how much of our attention they can consume. And the more of our attention they can consume, the more profits they're going to make. So all the algorithms are designed to consume more and more of your attention, and I think it's more alarming when you say to consume more and more of your life, because attention sounds neutral, but if you think of your life, like what we spend with our time, how we spend our time determines the quality of our lives. And I studied economics at Cambridge, across the ocean, and the only thing I remember from my economics course is the concept of the opportunity cost. That anytime we're doing something, we are foregoing doing something else. So that is something which is very specific to the way modern machine learning, AI, etc., is designed to consume more and more of our attention. The larger point that has been going on really since the Industrial Revolution is our fascination with machines. And I studied that when I was writing my book on sleep, because I wanted to understand how come that we came to believe something patently false, that sleep is optional. And I think unless you have a genetic mutation, right? If you have a genetic mutation, 1 to 1.5% of the population does, then you don't need a lot of sleep. The rest of us need 7 to 9 hours. I was actually with Anne Wyszynski, who launched 23andMe this afternoon. I told her that she has to deliver this test for people to know if they have this genetic mutation, and remind them that you cannot train yourself to have a genetic mutation. So back to the first Industrial Revolution. So our fascination with machines meant that we wanted to emulate them. And the goal with machines is to minimize downtime. And the goal with software is to minimize downtime. But the human operating system is different. Downtime is not a bug, it's a feature. And it goes back to every myth of creation, right? In every myth of creation, God creates heaven and earth in 6 days, and then she takes the 7th day off. Clearly God doesn't need a day off, right? Because God is omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent. So this was really a message to humanity, which we have been ignoring, and we're just beginning to rediscover it and to stop simply celebrating people for being always on.
Could you talk a little bit more about your goals for Thrive Global? We know that one of the hardest things to do is to change behavior, and yet a fundamental goal of Thrive Global is to change behavior. So you mentioned the app before, but what are some of the other approaches you're taking, both educationally and in the research that you're doing through Thrive Global?
So our fundamental goal, you're absolutely right, is behavior change, which is the hardest thing you can do. So as you know, here, ultimately, you need 2 things to change behavior: data and storytelling. You need a narrative and you need data. So Thrive Global is 2 things. It's a media platform, and it's a B2B operation where we go into companies and change the culture to eliminate a lot of the burnout and stress that so powerfully affects behavior. So the media platform is based on these 2 things: the latest science. That's why we love having your writings, and anybody here who is doing amazing writing on neuroscience, on any aspect of behavior, we'd love to cross-post them. And as I was telling you when we're upstairs, it's not about the latest, it's about anything, whenever it was written, that we can give wider distribution to. And it's not about exclusivity. Our motto is ubiquity is the new exclusivity. We just want to publish the best in any field that is around the area of how do you live a good life, which is a healthy life, a wiser life, a more giving life. So science, data is one part, and the other is storytelling. And storytelling for us means bringing together new role models. Anybody who is in the arena, like all of you here are, who writes that you can be in the arena, you can be successful, and you don't have to burn out in the process. So how do we counter this false belief? I think we need to counter it both through science and data and storytelling. So, for example, we had Jeff Bezos write a piece, and the headline was, "Why my getting 8 hours of sleep is good for Amazon shareholders." And he analyzed his decision making, and he actually made it very clear that when he gets 6 hours sleep, his decisions are 5 to 20% less good. And when your decisions are 5 to 20% less good, it's going to affect the future of your company. And we had Philip Schindler, who is the chief business officer at Google, write a piece about his moment of epiphany, as he called it, on a Saturday morning. He was back from a long trip. He told his young children, "Daddy's going to take you to the playground." And his little girl said, "Oh, really? Can't the babysitter take us?" And he was a little crestfallen and asked her why. And she said, "Because when you're on the playground, you're always on your phone." So that was the moment when he decided he would never be on his phone in front of his children. So by having people who are, by any definition, successful, we are kind of giving permission to the rest of the population to do life differently and know that they are not going to sacrifice success. And we also have thousands of contributors, they don't have to be well known, telling their stories. So we learn from each other. And we build a community that's helping each other on this journey. We see it as a journey. I don't know anybody who is doing this perfectly, certainly not I. We are all works in progress, but we can support each other by learning from each other as well as by learning from science. And then we bring together ancient wisdom that validates new science, which is kind of amazing. I mean, that if you go to the Tao and Lao Tzu and Yin Yang, I mean, Yin Yang is everything we're saying. Yang is you go out and achieve and conquer. Yin is you come back and refuel. We've just lost that refueling rhythm. The Bhagavad Gita, we just launched Thrive Global in India. The 3 lives described in the Gita are all exactly what we're going through. The second life is the frenetic life of busyness, and it's not enough. In every tradition, the Stoics, Zen, the Greeks, it's just kind of amazing to see how unified they are in how to live your best life.
As a business leader and a corporate board member, you have been a vocal advocate for civility and responsibility. And yet, particularly in these past couple of years, we have seen so many examples when leaders in very public-facing positions have exemplified behavior that, by any metric or standard, was egregious, both in their interactions with others and, most importantly, in the arena of sexual harassment. And I was wondering if you could share with us your thoughts about how we can change this. I think the Me Too movement has made things, increased awareness about what has been going on, although one of the deepest concerns to me anyway is that it has been going on for so long.
Yes.
And so acknowledging where we are today, how do we improve moving forward?
So I think this is an amazing moment of catharsis, as we Greeks call it. And there is a moment when whatever has been buried for years, often decades, is coming up to the surface. And that purging is incredibly important and necessary. And then the question is, how do we move forward and avoid this in the future? And I think one of the most important ways is for people to be able to be speaking out earlier and to feel supported, but we also feel more fearless about it. So I have 2 daughters who are in their 20s, and I know how hard it is for them to speak out even about little things. I was with my daughter the other day having lunch, and she said to me, "Oh, Mommy, they brought me the wrong salad dressing." And I said, "Well, tell them." "Oh, don't worry, I don't want to make a fuss." I said, "You're not making a fuss. you're just expressing something. So we have started now a whole cultural training at Thrive that we also bring into corporations. And the first ground rule is teaching compassionate directness. Being direct, speaking out, expressing, does not mean being adversarial, does not mean being rude. It means speaking out your truth. So I think that's going to be a very important thing for companies to teach, for us to teach our children. And it's very empowering, because one of the things that was the saddest in the whole Me Too movement was young women sitting on this anger and resentment and pain for years before they expressed it. Also, as we were discussing upstairs, living through the last few months at Uber as the only woman on the board, it was really an incredible learning experience. And one of the things I learned is that when a culture is fueled by burnout and stress, it's going to affect everything. That people who are burnt out act out. You are teaching with Dean Shaw a course in literature, medicine, and empathy. Well, we are finding out that when you are burnt out, empathy is one of the few things and one of the first things that go. Being able to be civil is one of the things that go. So all these things are very connected, and women are particularly affected, because given that there are more men in most workplaces than women, if they move into bro behavior, even if there isn't hardcore sexual harassment, it's going to affect how comfortable women are in that environment. On top of it, women tend to process stress differently. So women in stressful jobs, and I'm sure that's all of us, have a 40% greater risk of heart disease, a 60% greater risk of diabetes. So changing the culture is now recognized more and more as absolutely imperative, not just for the HR department, but for the CFO department and the bottom line.
Yeah, exactly. Arianna, you've made so many transformative contributions in so many different areas. What is your drive? What's your inner motivation, and what has guided you on your path?
So I've always wanted to have an impact on people's lives, however tiny. Ever since I fell in love with debating at the Cambridge Union, I just love the spectacle of people's hearts and minds being moved by words. And at first, for me, it was political and through journalism. And then after my own wake-up call, when I collapsed from exhaustion, burnout, and sleep deprivation, broke my cheekbone on my desk and came to in a pool of blood, and asked myself the question, is this what success looks like? Ever since that moment in 2007, I became more and more conscious of how there's an enormous amount of unnecessary suffering in the world that's based on a false belief. And while a lot of the suffering that we're all trying to solve in one or another, whether it's refugees, immigrants, the homeless, it seems so much harder to solve. This is something that can be solved simply when we convince people that it's patently false to think that that is the way to live your life if you want to succeed. And I have now come to this moment in my life where I want to spend the rest of my life doing that, and that's why I left the Huffington Post, which was a tough decision because it was like a third child, and I never thought I would leave. But it was not enough for me to just work on these issues through the Huffington Post. I wanted, after 12 years, to be able to give this 100%. And it has been amazing. I just love every moment. I love being here talking with you. I feel that we are going to be reaching a critical mass. And when we reach a critical mass, things will change dramatically, and a lot of people will be able to live their lives without all this unnecessary stress, burnout, pain, damage to their health and their relationships. And yesterday, I don't know if you had left the conference, but I interviewed Kevin Durant because one of the ways I think we can accelerate this culture shift is by listening to athletes, because athletes are all about winning. And they are talking more and more about how their well-being, how much sleep they get, their nutrition, recovery affects their performance. So people may not want to listen to scientists, or they may not want to listen to business people like Jeff Bezos, but they're going to listen to Kevin Durant and Kobe Bryant and LeBron James, and that's about all I know about sports, incidentally. So I did an e-course about all these aspects of healthy, productive life, and the first module is on sleep and meditation, and Kobe Bryant is my guest teacher. So again, it seems counterintuitive, but I think being able to create compelling content and using everything I used at HuffPost in the service of this cause is what's driving me now.
That's great. At the Fortune Brainstorm Health Conference on Monday, Mark Bertolini, the CEO of Aetna, gave his reflections on health and healthcare in America. And one of the things that he described that he was most worried about is the opioid epidemic and the underlying factors of disenfranchisement and hopelessness that characterize many of the young people who are so gripped by the opioid epidemic. And as we think about that, and in particular, and where I'm going with this is the relationship to technology, because technology has changed our lives, certainly in every sector of the economy, perhaps the least in healthcare so far, and hopefully that will change, but the way we order goods and services, the way we do financial transactions, and yet technology has eliminated entire sectors of the economy as a consequence of doing that. And so how do we, lots being discussed now about a guaranteed minimum, basic wage, but how do we address this really gripping problem of hopelessness among a greater and greater proportion of people, particularly in the middle of our country?
So I think that's a great question, and actually we are working on it with the University of West Virginia. And West Virginia, as you know, is one of the most affected states, not just in the opioid crisis, but it came number 50 on the Gallup Wellness Index, in just about every aspect, poverty, unemployment, obesity, opioid crisis. But they have this great new president of the university, Gordon Gee, whom you may know. He was president of Brown and Ohio State, and he came back to West Virginia, where he had been before, and his goal is to change these realities and create a template that would change the outcomes in all these elements. And so we have partnered with them and with the Rockefeller Institute that Senator Rockefeller has funded at the university to actually create a clinical trial where we go upstream and we introduce these micro steps that we have developed at Thrive to bring about changes that include all these elements that you mentioned. Obviously, the realities of poverty are very important. But we know from history and from literature that people can be extremely resilient in the middle of the most adverse circumstances. And so how do we cultivate this resilience? And we were talking about that. We had a panel on what we're doing in West Virginia at the Fortune conference. And a woman stood up and said, yes, all this discussion about spirituality and resilience is all very well. But the sewage is terrible in West Virginia. And we thought this is actually great, because to address these problems, you have to cover everything. You have to cover the sewage. But you also have to cover the emotional aspects of the opioid crisis. You can't just say people turn to opioids because they're unemployed, because that misses out, all these realities about despair, hopelessness, disconnection. A lot of the data we're collecting have to do with disconnection. People are lonely, and it's kind of ironic at a time when technology has made us more connected than ever. People are lonelier and more disconnected than ever, because these are kind of ersatz connections. So we are putting all that together. We are hoping to be able to come up with some results that we can duplicate. And of course, I'd love to discuss them with you as we are coming up with some useful data, and then introduce these micro steps and see what outcomes we get.
That's wonderful. Shall we open it up to the
Yes.
audience for questions? I think we have some microphones on either side here, so please.
And maybe you can tell us your name and what you do and how many hours sleep you got.
Hi, that was a one. I'm Michelle Cleo. I'm a neurosurgeon here. I wanted to ask you, you talked about the wisdom of the older people, the yin and the yang. And when I was in college many years ago, I had a professor that divided life into the Iliad and the Odyssey. The Iliad phase where you prove yourself, and the Odyssey. But it seems like the examples, Gates dominated software, and after he ruled the world, then he started the Gates Foundation. Kobe ruled basketball, and then he became balanced. And I guess in today's world, do you think it is necessary to go through a phase in life where you maybe are imbalanced for a while, not to the point where you commit suicide, and you get to a stage where you can afford or have the ability to become more balanced? Do you think maybe it's not one formula for everybody, but different formulas for different people at different stages, and depending on where they fall on the spectrum?
Actually, I don't. And that's really at the heart of everything I'm saying. That if you look at Kobe Bryant, he did not start prioritizing his sleep, meditation, etc., after he ended his career. On the contrary, he can talk to you about how the more he prioritized these things, the better his game became. Andre Iguodala we did a whole video series on him, and he can show you his stats after a good night's sleep, and his stats after he meditates, or how he eats. The same with Bill Gates. Bill Gates, throughout his career, had what he called think weeks. He would go off in a cabin without devices to think. So it's actually very different than, again, the perception we have that there are times when you just have to forget everything and just kind of be head down and always on. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to be having a 9-to-5 life. That's not what we're talking about. I mean, even at Thrive, in the company, we're saying, there will be days when you're shipping a product and you have to work extra hard or even pull an all-nighter. The question is, what are you doing the next day? We call them Thrive days. If you've worked extra hard, take a Thrive day and balance it quickly. So this is not in favor of some kind of very measured existence where you never work after 6 o'clock. But if you look at and nor does it mean that you can't succeed through burning out. I mean, we know a lot of people who have succeeded. But if you look, and I hope somebody here may do an analysis, if you look at the startups in the Valley, there is the founder myth. The founder never sleeps, the lights are always on. Well, 3/4 of startups fail. So they're doing something wrong, right? Maybe if they actually did get an 8-hour sleep, they might make better decisions and still be around. So I think, I recognize that it's hard for us to change such deep beliefs, but through a combination of data and stories, I think we can get there.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, my name is Mariam Hamidi. I'm one of the people here who is working on physician wellness at Stanford. And we do know that female physicians experience more burnout. So I want to be the voice of those physicians that we have heard in our surveys. And one comment that we hear a lot is unfairness at work, or for example, how female physicians are less likely to be called doctors by either their male colleagues or by their patients. So I'm sure as a woman you have experienced either unfairness or where you felt that your ideas weren't heard. And how do you go about that? How do you deal with it? And if you have any advice for our female physicians.
Especially female physicians with an accent, right?
Oh, yes. There you go, exactly.
I think you're absolutely right. Despite all our best intentions, women are still, in many instances, not given equal respect in whatever field, and I feel that this is particularly important, in a profession where you're making life and death decisions and where your own sense of well-being is so critical to your decisions. So I feel that it's very important, again, to address it head on. Again, that's back to compassionate directness. Mm-hmm. We think that being polite means just sitting on it and not saying anything. But I think by saying something, we also educate people around us who may not be ill-intentioned, but they behave in the default position that they've heard everybody around them behave. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, my name is Abhinav Sharma. I'm one of the residents here at Stanford. So I guess a point, I see a lot of parallels with some of the apps that you're developing in medicine, in the sense that if you have a drug or disease and we prescribe a therapy, sometimes you have to prescribe other drugs to counteract the side effects of your first therapies. I mean, although with our phones, when you have all of these apps, do we really need another app to counteract the side effects of the first apps that we have? Why not just turn off your phone if you're in a really important dinner, or encourage us to really peel back on some of these social media tools? Do we really need another tool to cut back on what we're doing? And the second point is, what are you doing from your app point of view? Like, what type of data are you collecting from our phones? Like, are you collecting what we use, where we go? There have been so many examples of now data being used from social media profiles with unintended consequences. So what are you doing to counteract that?
Great questions. First of all, of course, we don't need another app. It goes without saying that we can just turn off our phones. The truth is that millions of people don't. The data, again, shows that over 75% of people wish they could have device-free dinners, but 58% of them don't. It's their choice, but people don't do it. So it's just a question of encouraging behavior, helping people do what they want to do. It's not like we're asking them to do something they don't want to do, then obviously they won't use the app. But it's just encouraging them. And by having multiple people doing it and having it be bidirectional, you begin to change the culture. I'm in favor of using everything. We've even produced a product which is a charging station for 10 phones that looks like a phone bed. The idea is to live outside everybody's bedroom in a house, and it has a little blankie, so you put your phones under, and you tuck them in and say goodnight to them at night. I do that every night. It's like a little ritual. And do you need that? No, of course you don't need that. But again, human beings learn through ritual. And so if ritual can help us, great. It's basically, let's use everything. I mean, my oldest daughter went through drug addiction. So the whole AA, what is it? It's like you create a community, you support each other, you acknowledge that you are powerless in the face of your phone. And you are taking you are taking steps to help yourself. But you definitely don't need it. And it sounds like you don't need it because you may have the extraordinary discipline to do all these things. To do all these things without it. And your other question was
about data security.
We are adamant about data security and not using any personal data. If we collect data, it's all to see what apps you're using. Again, so that we can feed back to you ways to manage whatever your addictive app is.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Emmanuel?
Hi. So thank you so much for...
How is your narcoleptic dog?
He's doing great. I mean, he couldn't come here because he was sleeping, but I'm sure next time he will be too excited, maybe. But I want to thank you for all what you do, of course. And I want to say one thing that I think is important is that indeed, as you said, data is very important, but people listen less and less to data, I'm sorry to say, but a lot of the data is available or has been available, but very often data is overcome by belief and by people who just, you tell them this is what the data shows and they tell you, I don't believe it. And I've seen that many times in my career. And I think the way to turn this around is really, as you do, by really reaching leaders and people who really tell the truth about their experience in life and how sometimes it's difficult, try to make them a little bit more vulnerable in terms of they are not superhumans, which is a culture that's promoted also a little bit by males, I think, that, people are always, unable, they can not sleep, work extensive hours, they are better than everyone else, which of course is never completely true. And I think to have leaders reach out and showing their real experience that they need to sleep, that sleep is important for them, that they need to have a family life, a balanced life is very important. And I think that's probably one of the most important things that you're changing by having leaders show that indeed to be successful, you don't need to be crazy. And probably most people who say they're crazy, it's not true. They don't do it this way. Another very typical thing we can show by many surveys, when you ask people how much time they sleep, people very often, especially when there are high executives, they say, I sleep 5 hours, I sleep 4 hours. If you just deserve a log and you ask them how much time they sleep, to write when they go to sleep and when they go, wake up, you see that they sleep like everybody else. They sleep 8 hours. It's just because they usually don't tell the truth. And it's not that they are lying, it's that they have a false belief even about their own sleep. For example, they don't count when they sleep in the plane. They just say, they round up their hours. They say, yes, I go to midnight and I wake up at 5, but in fact, they often go to bed at 11, and they often wake up at 7, and during the weekend. No, but you add up these things, and at the end, you realize that, as you said, there's a lot of false belief. So I think the data is very important, and also having people realize that the leadership level, how important it is, it makes a huge difference. And I'm really very thankful of what you do.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for all your amazing work. And in fact, we launched my book, The Sleep Revolution, with you and Andrew Gudala. He came and he showed his stats and how his sleep improved his performance as a way, again, to make this really clear. And what I'm saying now, we work with a lot of financial companies like Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, and we're often told, all these investment bankers, they just care about winning. They don't care about sleep or relationship. I thought, okay, let's put it this way. Let's say you have a group of sociopaths here who don't care about anything except winning. They don't care about relationships, health, happiness, just winning. I can show them that they are going to win more and better if they follow these things. I know it sort of sounds like a little weird to actually appeal to sociopaths, but whatever it takes, I feel we have to meet people where they are. And And I also believe, because I profoundly believe that everybody has that center in them of peace, wisdom, and strength, that we say come for the productivity gains and stay for the life enhancement gains. And you may enter this journey for whatever is most important to you right now, but along this journey, you're going to discover things that are even more important.
Yeah, and they
Thank
all
you.
want to become partners so that they can relax a little bit.
Yes.
No, I mean, that's the truth, you know. So,
Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Pablo Paredes. I'm a new hire. I'm an instructor in the Precision Health and Integrated Diagnostics group. I've been doing research in, well, I'm a computer scientist, and I've been doing research in human-computer interaction, and I've seen how hard it is to really convince people to like change. Most of my research in behavior change and preventative medicine, trying to avoid people to really get to be sick. And the biggest challenge that I see is that, you know, my colleagues, the engineer inside, are investing, like 90% of them focus on problems and solving them rather than preventing things. And I think medicine is also focused on disease rather than health. How do we get society to really focus on putting the dollars in prevention and not in like treatment? I think there is like in NIH, like 90% of the money goes to like disease-oriented research as opposed to like let's keep people healthy. How do we really make a change in not only the things that we like and this romantic view of like let's make things better, but let's put the money where our mouth is in this thing of like being preventative?
Well, I completely agree with you. And of course, you know, Dean Minor has written so much about that, you know, the importance of focusing on predictive and preventive medicine rather than on disease care. And I think there is a very robust conversation about that right now. We need to change the incentives. And at every stage of life, at the moment, we have false incentives. You have, for example, 70% of people who say they want to die at home, and 30% of people do, with an incredible amount of spending by Medicare and others, you know, in the last months of life, not even year of life. So I would love to talk with you about what you're doing around behavior change, because that's kind of our big passion right now, and I'm sure we're going to learn from your research. So I want to give you and everybody here actually my email address, because I'd love you to share your stories and your knowledge, and that's the way to be able to accelerate this culture shift. So it's ah@thriveglobal.com. Thank you.
We'll talk, sure. Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Rachel Marikey, and I'm a research manager at the Children's Heart Center. And I have a confession. I was 15 minutes short on my 7 hours of sleep last night, so I will try my best to relay my question. My question relates to stress and to suffering, and there is a clear and compelling story around reducing that for people. But I'm wondering if there's also, in your opinion, a storyline to be told about reinterpreting stress as well as suffering to find your resiliency in the stress and in the suffering as well.
That's a great question. I think absolutely finding resilience in the suffering is you know, part of the human journey. Stress, we're talking about the unnecessary suffering of unnecessary stress. You know, we're never going to eliminate suffering and stress from life, but there's an enormous amount that is unnecessary. And that's what we're focusing on. And when we eliminate it, we suddenly have these incredible resources available to us. And there is that sense of mystery and magic and wonder about life that we rediscover, which we lose when we are just focusing on our to-do lists and clearing up all that is needed. So that's why what what we recommend as kind of 2 tiny micro steps to encourage that is, first of all, creating a transition to sleep. I think grown-ups have forgotten that as parents, we have a transition to sleep for our children. We don't just drop them in their crib. We give them a bath, and we sing them a lullaby, and we read them Goodnight Moon. But what do grown-ups do? They are on email or text until the last minute, then they put the phone on the nightstand and turn off the light. And then they wonder why they wake up at 3 in the morning and they can't go back to sleep. Because the brain may be exhausted, the body may be exhausted and go to sleep, but the brain has not slowed down. So we recommend that we pick a time at the end of our day, even if you start with 10 minutes before you're going to turn off the light, and turn off our phones and gently escort them out of the bedroom. Phones are the repositories of every project, every problem, everything we're dealing with. We need to separate ourselves from them. And that's the number one key micro step to beginning to reduce stress. And in fact, I've even done a parody. I've recorded a parody of Goodnight Moon called Goodnight Smartphone, which you can download for free from Audible. And you can ask Alexa or Google to play it for you before you go to sleep. And then the other micro step is when we wake up in the morning to take 1 minute, just 1 minute, to set our intention for our day, remember what we're grateful for, just inhale and exhale consciously before we go to our phone. 70% of people sleep with their phones by their bed and go to them first thing in the morning. And it's almost like flooding our bodies with cortisol before we've even gotten out of bed.
Great.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Γεια σας, ευχαριστώ πολύ και
τι κάνετε, θα μιλήσουμε ελληνικά. This is going to be conducted in Greek.
My name is Paulos Sandilas. I'm a vascular surgeon from Munich, Germany, doing my postdoc here in vascular surgery. So in Germany we have 30 days paid leave, and America is a beautiful country, especially California is a beautiful country. And a good thing I found out is that also in the national parks, especially if you go there, you can't use your phones because you don't have a network. So my question is, do you have an opinion or a recommendation on the ideal days of paid leave?
So, there are 2 things about that. One is how many days of paid leave, and the other is what do you do during your paid leave. So at Thrive, we're a startup. We do 3 weeks of paid leave. Other companies can do 4 weeks. I think 3 weeks is a kind of minimum of paid leave. But more important is we ask everybody when they're on vacation not to be on email, not to be on text for work. We have developed a feature, an app, whatever, depending on whether you're doing it in your company or you download it, called Thrive Away. And when I'm on vacation, for example, I put Thrive Away on, and if you text me or email me, you'll get a text or email back, says Arianna is on vacation until, let's say, April 5th. If this is urgent, contact so-and-so. If it is not, email her after April 5th. This email will be deleted. When was the last time anybody here had 0 emails in your inbox? It's amazing what it does. It really allows you to recharge deeply. And it's also very humbling, because when I came back, everything was fine. We all think we're so indispensable. And actually leaders who are indispensable it means that they are not really good managers. It means that they have not created a leadership team that can handle things in their absence. And that means they're micromanagers, and you are never going to attract great leaders if you are micromanaging them. So for all these reasons, we both need to look at how many days of paid leave you give, but incredibly important is what you do during those days. How many of you have received an out of office from someone, and 5 minutes later you receive a response? It's pretty useless, right?
That's great.
Thank you.
Last question.
I'm sorry. I'm Ariel Ziv. I'm a student at the business school here. And my question also has to do with workplace practices and startups. So, a lot of us here are probably thinking about starting companies. And I'm curious, when you have investors to answer to, and wellness is not a KPI, that they respond well to, how you can think about building, in addition to paid leave, those practices into your company, and how you think, even when you were starting HuffPo and weren't necessarily proven yet, how you might have been able to adopt some of these wellness practices, like before you're in a place where you're at now.
So I'm really happy you're asking that question, because that is the kind of idea that we need to counter with data and with stories. And that, in fact, you are going to be a more successful entrepreneur and founder if you practice these things for you and your team. And I know it's hard to believe that because it runs against the culture. So I totally understand where you're coming from. But I promise you, the science is so conclusive that you'll make better decisions, that you'll create a more thriving culture. And if you think of it, if a lot of the startups that worship on the altar of hypergrowth and everything is to be sacrificed on that altar end up with serious problems because they don't have a kind of culture that can sustain bad behavior or deal with bad times. And, a company's culture is like its immune system. You're not going to eliminate bad behavior. You're not going to overnight fix human nature. But if you have a thriving culture, you're going to be able to recognize problems and deal with them very fast before they spread and affect and contaminate the entire company, whether you're a company of 5 people or 16,000, as we are at Uber. So we now have seen enough examples of what happens when you don't prioritize what human beings need to operate at their best sustainably. Not just for a short period, but sustainably. And so I would highly, recommend that you do that. And I promise you, investors have seen what's happening when these things are not done. And they're much more open. The listening is changing. Even in the last year, you have much more understanding of what creates a thriving culture and a thriving company. And anybody who is interested in what we are doing at Thrive, we just closed our Series B, and IVP led our Series B, and we are hiring about 40 engineers and product people, people for the media platform. So where best to recruit than at Stanford? So since you are a student, I had to say that. Thank you so much. I'm sorry this is the last question, but I did give my email address, so those who were online and did not get to ask the question, please email me, and I promise to answer.
Arianna, on behalf of all of us, thank you so much.
Thank you.
The preceding program is copyrighted by the Board of Trustees of the Leland Stanford Junior University. Please visit us at med.stanford.edu.